in my opinion, there will be something that will break. We don't know what it is, but something that will break. And it's probably within the next three to 18 months at the longest. And at that point in time, they will have to reverse these policies. Money supply will have to start growing again. Inflation will come back with a vengeance. And gold will go through the triple top of $2,100. And, we'll be off to a $3,000 gold price and $35 or $40 silver price. And, I've just been meeting with mining companies all day long. I can tell you that if we have those kind of numbers in the metals, these companies are all going up, not 100%. They're going up 200, 300, 400%. I mean, it's insane how cheap they are. Because I sincerely believe that in the next, 12 to 18 months, we're going to see another leg up in this bull market, and things are very, very cheap right now. I think the most important thing that a lot of people have missed, and to me it's a really incredibly big signal, is that here we are, we have the Federal Reserve has shoved the cost of money up 500 plus basis points in the last 2.5 years or 2 years. And yet the price of gold is within spitting distance of an all-time high. I mean, in the past, in old macro land, if that had happened, gold would have gotten hammered. And it hasn't, and that's a tell. What that tells you is that gold is looking around the corner, recognizes that what they're doing is unsustainable, recognizes that there's going to have to be a pivot and a change of course, because mathematically the Fed is trapped. And they can lie, and they can gaslight us, and they can spin the numbers, they can do all the stuff they do, but the math is unrelenting. It's just unrelenting. And we saw it, and the math keeps popping its head up. I mean, in March, when Silicon Valley Bank failed, the math popped its head up. You got a real problem here. You got all these mismatched duration long assets, and all the banks are underwater. And black letter law, Dodd-Frank, we will never bail out the banks again. Well, what did they do? They bailed out the banks again. They broke black letter. And what this tells you, and what it tells me, is that these people are complete liars, and they're working to maintain their system because it benefits them and it makes them rich. And they will lie right up until the point at which they cannot anymore. The safest and lowest risk thing for people to do is to buy physical metal and hold it themselves, right? And the reason for that is there's no counterparty risk. And I know with great certainty, or I believe with great certainty, that the underlying value of these metals is going to increase substantially in the next 5 to 10 years as we're in an inflationary environment. So that's the starting point. And anyone who's looking to get into this area, I say start by owning the metals. I really believe that we went badly off track by following the Keynesian model. That we should have stayed, breaking the gold standard in 1971 was an enormous crime, an enormous mistake, and has really, in many, many ways, ruined the world. I really sincerely believe that. And I know that's to the average normie, that's a crazy and outside the boundaries view. But to anyone who's actually looked at it and studied it and understood what it was before then, it's pretty clear to me. And I think that mathematically it's going to become pretty clear to everybody else too, when inflation here is raging and maybe bordering on kind of Argentina sort of stuff. What are we going to do? How are we going to solve it? I mean, it's not clear to me that existing politicians can do that. I fear monetary collapse, to be honest with you. I think mathematically it's kind of baked in the cake, and it's going to be wrapped up in the politics. And we're obviously in a very nasty fourth turning. And to me, it's clear to me that, and I'm shocked that Howe didn't talk about it in his recent book, which I read, that it's all about the monetary issues, right? It's somewhat about geopolitical things in China and taking power in Russia, but it's really more about monetary issues. And so I think my greatest fear is that it happens quickly and chaotically, and that we have a Weimar-like experience. I hope that doesn't happen, but I think it's possible. Certainly in a 10-year time frame, I think it's possible. My hope is that what we're able to do is do some kind of a managed reset, and with a lot of government reform, which is badly, badly needed and overdue. That's my hope, because I think that harms the least. I mean, it gives the most people a chance to adjust without being harmed. But sadly, I fear that it could be more chaotic than that. So to me, I think what's going on and what's really right front and center for me is what Luke Groman calls fiscal dominance, and what I believe the position we're in, which I think is going to force the Fed being trapped and being forced into yield curve control as a result of the federal deficit. So I think the federal deficit is a ticking time bomb. We're going to run a $2 trillion deficit this year, probably $3 trillion next year. We've all seen the curve of the federal interest expenses. I mean, it's literally gone parabolic. The U.S. Treasury is paying close to $1 trillion a year in interest expense on its debt, because it's got a lot of short-term debt, and short-term rates went from 0 to 5.25. So to me, that is just it's a hidden in plain sight disaster waiting to happen. And so I watch everything related to that. And there are little clues you get around, the Japanese 10-year yield or the Japanese yen US cross because, the Japanese currency is fading. I mean, there are a lot of little clues you can see that all feed into that, or the US bond market and what's going on there, the price of oil, what's going on there. So I just look at kind of what the markets are telling me, and what they're telling me is that we're in the middle of a sovereign debt crisis, and absent. So some people come to invest in my fund and they say to me, Larry, what can go wrong? Why shouldn't I invest in this? It's a smart question. I respect people who ask this, and I'll tell you what could go wrong. And I'm a sound money person. I've invested since '08. I've been 100% focused, dialed in on sound money, and I'll tell you what could go wrong. The U.S. government suddenly got responsible, decided they were going to means test Social Security and Medicare, and maybe cut back the level for everyone else by 30 or 40%. And they decided they were going to stop sending money to Ukraine, and they decided they were going to cut the defense budget and pull back from all these bases that we have all around the world, and they were going to actually balance the budget. If they decided to do that, the sound money thesis would take a serious hit, okay? And my fund wouldn't do well, and gold wouldn't do well, and Bitcoin wouldn't do well, and things that I believe in wouldn't do well. Having said that, I think if they do all of that, they would have an enormous economic downturn. So even, they would have a depression, and even then, it's arguable that, the sound money thesis would work, because if you think about what happened to gold in the depression, it was fixed in its price because the government controlled it, but the price of everything else went down 90%. So in effect, its purchasing power went up 10x. So a tricky macroeconomic environment that is mathematically requiring us to have a reset, a monetary reset. And so the question becomes, how are we going to do that? Are we going to do it intelligently? Is it going to be forced upon us? How enlightened are our government leaders going to be? I'm not very hopeful. Right? It's a mess. It's very sad, and it's a mess.